Today we're looking at the 3 best gun builds at level 2 traders in the first stage of Tarkov's hardcore wipe, as currently we only have Prapor, Therapist and Jaeger at level 2 as of the time of recording. And what is great about the selection here is that we have 3 very different styles of weapon: a rifle, an SMG and a shotgun. So first let's start with the rifle, and this is the VSK-94, and I did tease this a little bit in one of my previous videos because I knew that this was going to be a good one before it even came out, and I've used it in previous wipes. But what's amazing about the VSK, and we should start with this before we even look at the gun at all, is about the ammo. On Prapor 2, at the perfect same time as you get the gun itself, you also get SP5. And SP5 is a very powerful cartridge. It does 71 damage and has 28 penetration. If you go and compare this to something like 545 PS that we actually can't even buy right now, that has 56 damage and 28 penetration. So this is a bit like a pumped up version of PS with slightly lower pen than something like M855, but it does the damage of 45 laser match. This makes it really scary to fight against because if it touches any of your limbs, arms or legs, it blacks them out straight away, which makes it impossible to heal back up to full health without using a CMS kit. So this thing is genuinely terrifying to fight against. Now obviously the VSK is suppressed, which makes this really good. 82,000 rubles is quite a lot, but you've got to bear in mind that the prices on all these other guns is really high. You can see all the other stuff on Prapor 2, it's mostly AKs, and those go for somewhere between 52,000 rubles and 65,000 rubles. So getting a suppressor as well for only about another 20k, 30k, something like that, I think is actually really good value for what it is. So some of the features of the weapon are also kind of downsides, and one of the reasons why this can be so powerful is that it only has 20 round magazines. So the regular guns that you're going to be using are probably going to have 30s, and Prapor 2 is the point at which you can start buying 30 round magazines for 7.62x39 weapons and not just 5.45. And so the 20 rounds in here, they do limit your ability to use it a little bit. But within the last couple of patches, BSG changed this weapon from 900 RPM to 700, which I actually think is quite good for this gun because it means that you don't use up all your bullets straight away, the recoil is a little bit more manageable, and it doesn't get too hot. This is the issue with pretty much all the 9x39 guns because they really suffer from heat. And if you look at the barrel, this doesn't look too bad here on durability burn and heat because this is relatively manageable. But what kills you is the statistics on the bullets themselves. Now you can't see that in game, so we have to pull up the wiki chart to see that. You can see that even SP5 makes an awful lot of heat, and it means that the gun gets very close to jamming after only 2 full mags on full auto. So you do have to be a little bit careful with how you fire it. That being said, modding on this weapon is very straightforward. There's only 2 things that you can really do with it. One of them is putting a mount on at the front, but at the moment we can't buy the B3 ring mount, so we have to do something else. And where we put optics and lasers is over here on the back. You have the regular selection of dovetail sights, so you could do stuff like the PSO if you want to fire it over long distances. I don't really like this very much because if you notice the muzzle velocity, it's only 246 meters per second, and this can make it really hard to actually hit stuff at long ranges. And so I tend to use this a little bit closer. And for that, you can use various different optics that people quite like. The EKP is a good one. One advantage of the EKP is that using the shade and the EKP itself, it doesn't actually take any ergo away. So even though it looks like it's -3, it's only -3 for the EKP itself. And then the Cobra shade adds 3 back on, so it ends up not affecting your ergo at all. The Obzor is not actually that bad. It looks like it's not going to be very good, but it's got quite a nice sight on it. And the one that I probably prefer the most is the OKP7 Dovetail. This one can't be bought until Skier 3, but you do find it out in the world relatively often. So if you see them, pick them up because I quite like them. Some people don't like the fact that it's actually offset very slightly from the gun. It's not directly over the center and it's off to the left a little bit. So you do get a mismatch between where you're looking and where you're shooting. But if you're using it in CQB, it doesn't really matter that much. Now the problem with all of these is that with the inability to buy the B3 mount, if you put on just a regular dovetail mounted optic, you don't get any benefit to point fire. And this is where the next trick is going to come in. So I almost always use one of these Cobra dovetail mounts because you get a rail on the side which allows you to put on a flashlight or a laser. I've just kind of been using whatever I pick up in raid recently. You can add the blue laser if you want to, or you can use something like an X400 that you typically tend to find on scav shotguns, that kind of thing. So you've got a flashlight and laser combination. And then obviously up here we've got a rail where we can put some optic of some description. It really depends on what you like. MRS maybe, you could put this Weaver sight on here. With these traders open, you can even put on the Monstrum Tactical 2x if you would like, but really you just pick whichever sight you're comfortable with and run with that. So new players and people who haven't played for a while, they often ask me why I feel like this is so important for point fire, and I'll show you a demonstration that I ran in the hideout just to showcase exactly how important this is. What basically happens is that if you're using a flashlight and a laser, it makes your point fire so much more vertical. Yes, you still get the vertical spread from the recoil, but you don't get much horizontally. As soon as I turn it off and try to fire, you can see that the horizontal spread is way wider, and when you're trying to get a headshot in point fire, it makes a massive difference. Now this works with all flashlights and all lasers except for ones that go onto the gun with a separate mount. So you can use any of these, but as soon as you're using the 25mm ring mount, for example, and then putting in one of these, the ultrafire flashlight, this won't work anymore. Outside of this, it doesn't actually matter whether you're using a flashlight or a laser. As long as it's connected directly to the gun, it doesn't matter. It will work and it will give you better point fire. This is why later on down the line, once we unlock the WMX 200, I will end up using these because you can stick them onto IR flashlight mode and you'll still get the point fire bonus despite the fact that you can't actually see anything. So I do think it is really important if you want the ability to fight at close range, because otherwise getting point fire headshots is really hard and you have to rely on ADSing, which when you're right up close to somebody around a door or something is not really feasible. Before we continue, imagine playing Tarkov with no cheaters, no aimbot, no wall hacks, and no paid carries in any of your raids. Today's video is sponsored by PlaySafeID, and this is exactly what they are trying to achieve. But to make this a reality, they need your help. The problem with cheating in games is that when people are caught, they often simply buy another account and jump right back in. And the fragmented approach to anti-cheat in each game clearly isn't enough to prevent the epidemic across the industry. The difference with PlaySafe then is that it isn't actually an anti-cheat. Instead, anyone caught cheating in any of the games that it's integrated with will face penalties not on their game account, but on their PlaySafeID. This means that if someone is caught, for example, in PUBG, they'll be unable to access PlaySafe protected matchmaking in Tarkov, Apex, Call of Duty, and all the rest. For this to work though, the developers of these games need to take this solution seriously, and for that, we need you. All you have to do at this stage is go to the link in the description and register your interest. That's it. It's so easy and will take less than 10 seconds. With your vote, alongside tens of thousands of other gamers, PlaySafeID will be building the strongest possible case to change the gaming industry forever and crack down on cheating once and for all. The important thing to remember about PlaySafeID is that it's optional, it's free, and it won't be required to play any of the games that you own, either now or in the future. What it does do is allow a more protected circle of matchmaking above the regular one, where you know that the chance of running into a cheater is significantly reduced. How it works is neat but simple. Every gamer can claim one single PlaySafeID for life through a special check called Zero Knowledge Verification. This means that PlaySafe can verify that you are real and that you haven't had an account before without ever having any of your documents or data. So if you want to see a world with no cheaters in online multiplayer, and I know I certainly do, then head to the link and go and register your interest to see this dream become reality. Now, I was intrigued because the VSK obviously comes on Prapor 2 together with a suppressor, but we also have a gun on Prapor 1, the 9A91, for which the suppressor appears on Prapor 2, and I was intrigued because I'd never actually used the 9A91 as to which is better. Through my investigations, it's actually quite interesting because both guns are identical, except for the stock and pistol grip. They have exactly the same stats outside of these two parts, and what happens is when you put the stock on the VSK, this gives you minus 28% recoil and plus 5 ergonomics. Whereas if you use the 9A91, the stock itself gives you minus 20 recoil, and the pistol grip gives you plus 5, with the stock giving you plus 16 ergo. So on this case, you end up with 21 ergo and minus 20% recoil. So in short, the 9A91 has better ergonomics and the VSK has better recoil. So obviously I conducted another test to see what did what, and the 9A91 ADSs in about 7 frames versus 11 frames with this particular setup. And how I was measuring that is looking at when the dot of the reticle appears on the screen. That's kind of the first plausible point at which you could use it for targeting on somebody. So it'll be a couple more frames than this to actually have it in the center, but this gives us a consistent measurement of how fast one is versus the other. So 7 frames for the 9A91 at 60 Hz, that represents 117 milliseconds, and 11 frames with the VSK, which represents 183 milliseconds. And that does sound quite a long time, but when you're using them, that is relatively short. These things aren't low ergo guns by any means, and so they're both definitely usable. So next we need to look at the vertical recoil, and when we fire both of them, it's quite surprising how much difference this small amount of vertical recoil reduction actually makes to the VSK. It is considerably better, and the recoil peaks way lower on the VSK than it does on the 9A91. So overall, I do actually think you're probably better off going for the VSK. It is also slightly cheaper, but if you are very sensitive to ergonomics, feel like you can handle the recoil, then maybe you want to give the 9A91 a try out because it is snappier at the expense of greater recoil. Alright, so the next one we're going to look at is the KEDR-B. I already talked about the KEDR and the Clin in my level 1 traders video because they are pretty good and you can get decent ammo for them very early on. And one of the wonderful things about the KEDR KEDR-B is that you can't do anything to it, so you don't even have to worry. You can't put sights on it, but the irons are actually quite nice. Now, this is also suppressed, so this is great for running around and not getting third-partied, but one of the interesting things about the KEDR-B is that unlike when we were turning the KEDR into the clins and using the workbench to make PSTM won't actually go in the KEDR-B because it's an overpressure round and it was only designed for the clin. So with the KEDR, we have to use a different ammo. But when we look into the ammo availability, one that you can get access to is this one, a Prapor level 2, which is PBM. This is actually the highest penetration cartridge that you can get in 9x18, which is 28 pen, which means that most of the time it'll penetrate through a class 3 helmet. Now, because the damage is only 40, it might actually not kill them, and even against naked players, you have to shoot them 3 times in the thorax for them to die. But with the fire rate of the KEDR-B and the low recoil, I don't think it's necessarily a big issue. Obviously, you could also do leg meta as well with this, and for that, you technically want to have this one, SP7, because this has the highest damage of all of the 9x18 cartridges with 77. But you can't get access to this until you've completed You've Got Mail on Streets, which is part of the Ice Cream Cone's main questline of Prapors. So the next best option is this one, PSV, which comes from Jaeger, and this does 69 damage. So this gun is very, very simple, very, very straightforward. And another great thing about Prapor 2 is that you can now buy the KEDR magazines straight away, which you can put into the KEDR-B, and you can now run as many 30s as you like. And they're only 5,000 rubles, which in this wipe is pretty cheap, honestly. So finally, we're going to look at the last gun, and this is over on Jaeger. And Jaeger's opened up a bunch of shotguns and a few other weapons like pistols and the M700, but really we want to be focusing on the shotties. And the reason for this is if we go into the ammo that he sells, you get access to Piranha. Piranha is like baby Flechette, and if you look down here, it fires 10 projectiles, which is 2 more than Flechette, and it does 25 damage, which is the same as Flechette. And so the overall damage capacity of Piranha is 250. Although the penetration isn't as high, but this doesn't necessarily matter, and this is partly because of how it works. So the crazy thing about Piranha and Flechette, and they're a bit different to every other type of round in the game, is that with a projectile count of 10, every individual dart is calculated separately. When you look into the statistics of these, the armor damage percentage is quite low, which is one of the functions that tells you how much damage to armor the projectile is actually going to do, and this combines with the penetration to do the calculation. And this is quite low for Piranha, but it's about half of that of other similar ammos. But because each dart calculates in turn, by the time you've got to dart 2, 3, or 4, you're actually doing way more armor damage than you would for a single bullet from another category. And if you hit them with anywhere near all 10, you can take somebody's armor down to 50%, even if it's a pretty good one, despite the fact that it's only 24 penetration rated on the shell. So you need to think about these a little bit differently than you do with a regular cartridge. At Jaeger 2, we get access to a couple of different shotguns, but the main 3 that are any good is the MP155, the MP153, and the Saiga 12K. And in previous wipes, I've liked the MP153 just because it's so cheap, you can just slap a sight on it and extend the mag. But in this particular wipe, I'm really enjoying the Saiga 12K, and this is because of the accessibility of the 10-round magazine, which is bigger than anything you can get for the other 2, and you get it so early as well in this wipe. The main downside of these magazines is the fact that they are 1x3. So before we even talk about anything else, you basically need to be using this particular rig. This is the one rig that we can buy at the moment that has 3x1 slots. And if you're using the Saiga and you're using it all game, unless you do pick up somebody else's complete gun that you want to use, you're kind of stuck with this. You can't change to someone else's rig because otherwise you won't be able to reload anymore. So that's kind of the one big downside. But having 10 plus 1 in the chamber of Piranha in this gun is absolutely terrifying at this point in the wipe. That is definitely enough to kill anybody with one magazine, kind of no matter what they're wearing at this stage. The build for this is relatively straightforward. You can decrease some of the recoil by using the GKO2, which is available directly on Jaeger. If you find a monster chlorine raid, that's going to reduce it even more, but I'm just using the GKO2 right now. And then we can use a similar principle to the VSK because this also has a dovetail mount as well. We're going to use the Cobra again, and we're going to stick on another sight or laser, whichever one you want to do. An X400 will do just nicely, and we're going to put a dot on top. I typically go for the cheapest that I can because with a shotgun, it really doesn't matter. So I often end up using the PKO6 because this is one of the cheapest red dots you can buy in the whole game. All you want to do is kind of get the crosshair sort of roughly over your opponent and start blasting. There are other ways to get lasers and sights onto this gun, but the issue is right now, you can't change the handguard over to anything else. So there's a whole bunch of these different ones. Sometimes you find this one on scavs, the MTU short top aluminium handguard, and that one allows you to put vertical foregrips and that kind of thing on there, but you don't have the ability to buy that from the traders. And honestly, at this point, I think it's probably overkill. You can't reduce the recoil enough, and the ergo is fine. So this is the build that I would probably recommend. It gives you your better point fire bonus, which is less important for shotguns with a multi-projectile cartridge. We have a little sight here, some recoil reduction, and importantly the 10-round mag. Now, obviously, you can increase the ergo a little bit if you get a better pistol grip. Right now, we can't buy any. There is the ability to add the PT lock and some of the folding stocks too, but I don't think it makes enough difference either to make it worthwhile. So I've just been going with this, and one of the main benefits of using a weapon like this is that Piranha kills almost all scavs in one hit, because they're not really wearing any armor. The amount of scavs that have got class 4 armor on these days is decreased a lot, and most of the time they will just die straight away. Piranha is also really good at catching people in the upper part of the body. You don't have to do any weird leg meta stuff, so you're always aiming kind of at face and the throat area. And because the throat area is unprotected for the most part, very, very few players are wearing throat armor that is class 3, because the base carriers are almost all class 2 at this stage. Piranha will go straight through with its 24 pen, and you only need to catch somebody with 4 of the darts for them to die, or 2 in the head. Now, although this is my favorite version of the Piranha Slinger, I will also show you the 153, just because I know that not all quests allow the Saiga. There are some which are the MP series shotgun type quests, like Setup, which is coming later. I haven't done that yet. But at this point in the wipe, these things are really useful. The fact that it shows you green when you can buy it and red when you can't. This allows you to use the MP153 7-rounder mag, which is not bad. That's 7 in the mag and then 1 in the gun. On the top, I love using this thing, the target ring. This makes using the multi-shot cartridge like Piranha really great. And on the front, you can add the cylinder 12 gauge and the GK02 again as well. We're still slightly short of being able to use this, because even though you've got the pad there, you then can't get this until a bit later on. So unfortunately, we're stuck just using the regular stock for now, but this is also pretty cheap and decent if you need something in the MP series that isn't a Saiga. But I think the Saiga probably is better because you get 11 shells to start with in it. So do remember to go and register your interest for PlaySafeID. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.